This is a hypothetical scenario based on publicly available information about naval doctrine, aircraft capabilities, and carrier strike group operations. It is designed for educational purposes only and does not represent any real military engagement. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a waterway. It is a 21-mile choke point where 30% of the world's seaborne oil passes every single day. When a carrier strike group enters these waters, it is not making a voyage. It is making a statement. But what happens when that statement gets answered with fourth-generation fighter jets carrying anti-ship missiles designed specifically to kill carriers? On a clear morning in the Northern Arabian Sea, the United States Navy Carrier Strike Group, centered on the USS Abraham Lincoln, received threat warnings that would change the calculus of deterrence in the region. Iranian Air Force Sukhoi Su-35 Flanker E fighters, recently acquired and modified with extended range munitions, were detected on an intercept course. Their mission profile suggested one objective: test whether the most sophisticated naval air defense network in the world could be penetrated. The question was not whether the carrier could defend itself. The question was what happens when defense means escalation. And escalation means consequences no one can predict. Here is what most people do not understand about carrier operations in contested waters. The ship is never alone. The USS Abraham Lincoln does not sail into threat zones relying on its own systems. Like, it operates as the center of a layered defensive bubble built from satellites, destroyers, electronic warfare aircraft, and submarine pickets positioned hundreds of miles away. When Iranian Su-35s climbed to altitude over the Persian Gulf, they were not just detected by one radar. They were being tracked by at least 6 different sensor nodes before they even left Iranian airspace. Space-based infrared satellites registered their engine heat signatures. E-2D Hawkeye early warning aircraft orbiting at 25,000 feet painted them on radar and transmitted data through Link 16 tactical networks. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers positioned in a defensive screen activated their AN/SPY-6 air search radars, capable of tracking objects the size of a baseball at ranges exceeding 200 nautical miles. Now, at the moment those Su-35s turned toward the carrier, every unit in the strike group knew their position, speed, heading, and probable weapons loadout. That is not luck. That is architecture. Now, this is where the ocean lies to you. In open water warfare, range equals survival. The side that can detect first and shoot first controls the engagement. Iranian Su-35s, upgraded with Russian-made Kh-31's anti-ship missiles, have a published range of approximately 75 nautical miles when launched at altitude. That sounds threatening until you understand what the United States Navy fields in response. The carrier's air wing includes F/A-18 Super Hornets equipped with AIM-120AM RAAM, air-to-air missiles effective beyond 50 nautical miles, and the destroyers carry Standard Missile 6, which can engage aerial threats at ranges exceeding 200 nautical miles. The arithmetic is unforgiving. Iranian jets would have to penetrate through multiple engagement zones, each defended by overlapping weapon systems, just to reach their launch point. And even if they successfully launched their missiles, those weapons would still need to survive another layer of defenses. SM-2 medium-range missiles, evolved Sea Sparrow short-range missiles, close-in weapon systems firing 50 rounds per second, electronic warfare jamming that can spoof missile seekers. The carrier is not a target. It is a fortress wrapped in mathematics. But here is the hidden trade-off. Active defense reveals your position. Every radar pulse, every missile launch, every electronic countermeasure broadcasts your location and capability to anyone listening. In modern naval warfare, stealth is not just about being invisible. It is about controlling what the enemy knows. When the Iranian Su-35s approached, the United States Strike Group faced a decision point. Engage early with long-range missiles and eliminate the threat decisively, but in doing so, reveal the exact performance parameters of American defensive systems. Or wait, demonstrate restraint, and accept the risk that waiting introduces. The choice was not just tactical, it was strategic. Because once you show what your systems can do, you teach your adversary how to beat them next time. That is the real cost of interception. You win the engagement but lose the advantage of uncertainty. And in deterrence theory, uncertainty is often more valuable than firepower. So what actually happened when the Su-35s closed to within 150 nautical miles? The United States did not fire. Instead, 4 Fa-18 Super Hornets launched from the USS Abraham Lincoln, climbed to 30,000 feet, and established a combat air patrol directly between the Iranian jets and the carrier. They did not lock weapons. They positioned themselves in a visual intercept formation, close enough that Iranian pilots could see them through their canopies. This is called presence. It sends a message without firing a shot. The message is simple: we see you, we are ready, and if you continue, we will respond. At the same time, EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft began broadcasting powerful jamming signals across the frequencies used by Iranian fire control radars. Not enough to completely blind them, but enough to degrade their targeting quality. Enough to introduce doubt. Enough to make the Iranian pilots question whether their missiles would track accurately if launched. This is the invisible battlefield, the fight that happens before the fight. And it is often more decisive than any missile exchange. Now let us talk about the kill chain, because this is where doctrine meets reality. Killing a carrier requires more than just a missile. It requires a sequence. Find the target, fix its position, track its movement, target with accurate coordinates, engage with weapons, assess the damage. Every step in that sequence is an opportunity for failure. In this hypothetical scenario, Iranian forces struggled at step 1. Finding the carrier is not the challenge. Satellites and reconnaissance flights can locate carrier groups easily. The challenge is fixing the position accurately enough for a missile shot. Carriers move at 30 knots. In the time it takes for a reconnaissance aircraft to report a position, transmit that data back to command, relay it to strike aircraft, and have those aircraft transit to launch range, the carrier has moved 15 nautical miles. Unless you have real-time targeting data transmitted directly to the launch platform, your missile is chasing a ghost. Iranian Su-35s do not have that level of integration with overhead reconnaissance. They rely on older link-type systems that introduce delay. Delay means error. Error means missed shots. Here's what defense analysts rarely mention. Anti-ship missiles are not intelligent hunters. They are program seekers following instructions. Most anti-ship missiles use active radar homing in their terminal phase, meaning they turn on their own radar in the final miles of flight to lock onto the target. That makes them vulnerable to deception. United States Navy ships carry sophisticated decoy systems, Nolka hovering rocket decoys that fly away from the ship while broadcasting a radar signature larger than the ship itself. Chaff clouds that create false targets, electronic countermeasures that feed false range and bearing data to incoming missile seekers. A missile does not think. It follows the strongest signal, and if that signal is a decoy located 2 miles away from the actual ship, the missile follows the decoy. That is not theory. That is how modern naval air defense works. You do not need to destroy every incoming missile. You just need to confuse enough of them that the few remaining can be intercepted by hard kill systems. Now this is where sensor fusion becomes the invisible advantage. Every radar, every infrared sensor, every electronic support measure receiver on every platform in the strike group feeds data into a common tactical picture. That picture is not just dots on a screen. It is a constantly updating prediction model. The system tracks not just where the Su-35s are, but where they are going, what weapons they could carry, what their fuel state limits their options to, and what tactics they are most likely to employ based on their formation and heading. This is called predictive battlespace awareness. It means American commanders are not reacting to what Iranian jets are doing. They are anticipating what Iranian jets can do next. That anticipation allows pre-positioning of defensive assets before the threat materializes. F/A-18SS can be launched before the enemy reaches their launch point. Electronic warfare can be activated before enemy radars lock on. The engagement is won before it begins because the decision cycle is faster. Observe, orient, decide, act. The side that completes that cycle first controls the outcome. And when your observation layer includes satellites, your orientation layer includes artificial intelligence, assisted threat assessment, your decision layer includes pre-authorized rules of engagement, and your action layer includes weapons already in position. You are operating inside the enemy's decision cycle. They are still observing when you are already acting. That is the real edge. But here's the part most people miss. This entire architecture depends on something fragile. Communications. Every sensor node, every weapons platform, every command center must be able to transmit and receive data in real time. If those communication links are disrupted, the system fractures into isolated units operating on limited information. That is why electronic warfare is not just a support function. It is the main effort. Both sides are trying to blind, deafen, and confuse the other side's networks while protecting their own. The electromagnetic spectrum is the battlefield. Jamming, spoofing, and cyber intrusion are the weapons. And the side that controls the spectrum controls the engagement. In this hypothetical scenario, the United States maintained spectrum dominance through layered redundancy. Multiple communication pathways, frequency hopping radios, satellite links that cannot be jammed from the surface. Undersea fiber optic cables connecting command nodes. If one pathway is blocked, the network reroutes through another. That resilience is built through investment. Billions of dollars in infrastructure that most people never see, but every combat operation depends on. But let us flip the scenario. What if Iranian forces change their approach? Instead of launching a frontal attack with fighter jets, what if they used a saturation strategy? Launch multiple waves of missiles from different vectors simultaneously. Coastal anti-ship batteries firing from land, submarines launching torpedoes from below. Fast attack craft swarming from multiple directions. Overwhelm the defensive systems through sheer numbers. This is the nightmare scenario that every carrier strike group trains against. It is also the scenario that requires perfect coordination, something that is extraordinarily difficult to achieve in combat. You need simultaneous time-on-target convergence from platforms operating hundreds of miles apart, communicating through networks that are being jammed and degraded by American electronic warfare. You need weapons that can survive long enough in a defensive environment to reach their target. And you need the political will to commit to an attack that will certainly provoke a full-scale military response. That last part is the constraint most analysis ignores. This is where escalation control becomes the real battlefield. Launching Su-35s on an intercept course is aggressive, but it is not war. It is signaling. It says we are willing to challenge your presence. But actually firing a missile at a United States carrier is an act of war that will trigger Article 5 collective defense obligations, global condemnation, and a military response that will not stop at defending one ship. The question Iranian commanders faced was not whether they could hit the carrier. The question was, what happens after? Because if you damage a United States carrier, you have not won a tactical victory. You have guaranteed a strategic defeat. The United States will not accept the loss of a $13 billion capital ship and 5,000 sailors without a response that fundamentally changes the security environment. That response might include strikes on Iranian air bases, naval facilities, missile production sites, and command centers. It might include a blockade that shuts down Iranian oil exports entirely. It might include cyber attacks that cripple infrastructure. The cost of attacking the carrier is not measured in missiles. It is measured in the collapse of your own defensive posture. Most conflicts are decided before the first shot. That is not rhetoric. That is the lesson of every modern naval engagement. The side that understands the consequences of escalation controls the escalation. In this hypothetical scenario, Iranian Su-35s turned back before entering the engagement zone. Not because they could not continue, because continuing would have crossed a threshold that commanders in Tehran were not authorized to cross. This is called deterrent stability. Both sides understand the cost of action, and both sides choose restraint because the cost is unacceptable. The United States did not need to fire a missile to win. It needed to demonstrate that it was ready to fire. and that the consequences of forcing that decision would be catastrophic for the other side. That is the paradox of naval power. The most effective weapon is the one you never use. Now here is the catch. This does not mean what you think it means. Some people interpret restraint as weakness. They see fighter jets turning back and assume the threat was not real. That is a dangerous misunderstanding. The reason the Su-35s turned back is precisely because the threat was real. If American defenses were weak, if the carrier was vulnerable, Iranian forces would have pressed the attack. Restraint happens when both sides recognize overwhelming capability on the other side. It happens when you know that proceeding means losing. The fact that no shots were fired does not mean the confrontation was meaningless. It means the confrontation worked exactly as deterrence theory predicts. You demonstrate capability, you impose cost calculations, you force the other side to choose between escalation and survival. And when survival wins, you have achieved your objective without firing a shot. That is not luck. That is the function of naval power. Let us consider 3 possible scenarios if this engagement had escalated differently. Scenario 1. Iranian forces launch missiles, and all are intercepted. The immediate tactical outcome is an American victory, but the strategic outcome is more complex. Iranian military leadership now has detailed knowledge of American defensive capabilities. They know intercept ranges, they know reaction times, and they know which systems activated and in what sequence. That information allows them to develop countermeasures, adjust tactics, and plan future operations with better understanding of what works and what does not. Every defensive success is also an intelligence loss. Scenario 2. Iranian missiles penetrate defenses and damage the carrier. The ship does not sink. Modern carriers are incredibly resilient, but it is forced to withdraw for repairs. The immediate tactical outcome is an Iranian success, but the strategic outcome is catastrophic. The United States Navy responds with overwhelming force. Iranian air bases are struck, coastal defenses are destroyed. The Su-35 fleet is grounded by targeting their support infrastructure. Iran achieves one tactical hit at the cost of losing its ability to project power for years. Scenario 3. Cooler heads prevail, as they did in this hypothetical. Both sides demonstrate capability, both sides exercise restraint, and the confrontation de-escalates. The strategic outcome is stability. No one wins decisively, but no one loses catastrophically. That is not exciting, but it is how great powers avoid wars they do not want. Here is what people miss about carrier strike groups. They are not just military assets, they are diplomatic tools. When the United States positions a carrier in the Northern Arabian Sea, it is not preparing for war. It is preventing war. The presence of overwhelming force makes aggression irrational. It raises the cost of conflict so high that negotiation becomes the only logical path. That is the function of deterrence. Not to fight, to make fighting so costly that no rational actor chooses it. The Iranian Su-35s approaching the carrier were not attempting to sink it. They were testing resolve. They were asking the question, are you really willing to defend this position? And the American response, by launching fighters, activating defenses, and maintaining readiness, answered that question clearly. Yes, we are here, we are ready, and we are not leaving. That answer is what prevents miscalculation, because when both sides understand each other's red lines, they avoid crossing them. But presence requires logistics. A carrier strike group does not simply arrive and stay indefinitely. It requires continuous resupply. Fuel for the ships, jet fuel for the aircraft, food for 5,000 sailors, spare parts for maintenance, ammunition for weapon systems. All of this flows through a logistics network that spans thousands of miles. That replenishment ships shuttle between ports and the strike group, delivering supplies every few days. Tankers provide fuel. Ammunition ships deliver missiles. The logistics tail is what enables sustained presence. Without it, the carrier would be forced to withdraw within weeks. This is the hidden constraint on naval power. You can have the most advanced ships and aircraft in the world, but if you cannot sustain them forward, you cannot project power. and sustaining them forward requires bases, agreements with partner nations, and shipping lanes that remain open. That is why freedom of navigation is not just a legal principle, it is a military necessity. If shipping lanes close, the logistics network collapses, and the carrier becomes a wasting asset burning through its reserves until it must retreat. Enemies understand this. That is why they target logistics as much as combat platforms. So what does this mean for the future of naval power in contested regions? It means that technology alone does not determine outcomes. Strategy, signaling, and restraint matter, just as much as missiles and radars. It means that the most important battles are the ones that never happen, because deterrence worked. And it means that understanding the constraints on military action, the logistics, the decision-making, the political costs, is more valuable than understanding the weapons themselves. The USS Abraham Lincoln did not need to destroy the Su-35s to achieve its mission. It needed to be present, capable, and willing to act if necessary. That combination is what maintains stability in a region where stability is fragile. And that is the real power of a carrier strike group. Not what it destroys, what it prevents. The engagement ended without casualties, without damage, and without escalation. That is not a failure of military power. That is the purpose of military power. To be strong enough that strength does not need to be proven through violence. To be ready enough that readiness alone changes the behavior of potential adversaries. And to be present enough that presence becomes the message. When Iranian Su-35s turned back, they were not retreating from a battle, they were acknowledging a reality. That attacking a United States carrier strike group is not a tactical challenge. It is a strategic impossibility. And that impossibility is built on decades of investment in technology, training, doctrine, and alliances that create a defensive network no single platform can penetrate. Now, the question is not whether Iranian forces could attempt an attack. The question is whether they could survive what comes after. And the answer to that question is what keeps the peace. This video is for educational purposes only, based on publicly available information about naval doctrine, aircraft capabilities, and carrier strike group operations. It is not operational advice and should not be used to plan harm or wrongdoing. All scenarios presented are hypothetical and do not represent real military engagements,